Is this the dagger?
G'day guys, JB here coming at you with another review. It is at the All-Star break, so I'm not going to do a really big in-depth breakdown. There were only a few games on the week before the All-Star break. There's only a couple heading into the weekend where I would normally do the week 16-17. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that out for another 10 or so days and wait till I've got a couple of weeks worth of action. There's no point doing 1 or 2 days worth of a spiel and then 1 or 2 days worth of a spiel. I'll let it build up, do a couple of weeks there, and essentially just going to be a really brief summary of where every team sits right now, who I think has been their best player so far on the season. Only short, only sweet, but it is something for us to have a look, and yeah, a brief little discourse on the All-Star weekend. So without further ado, let's get into it. To the All-Star break, the NBA for the 23-24 NBA season, starting in the East with Atlanta. They're 24-31, and their best players being Trae Young, who I have at 14 wins. So he's been the leader in the majority of their games. He's been a genuine contender for me as far as top 10 players, top 12 players in the East. At one point there, he was really making some runs towards the top of that conference there, which would have certainly put him in a bit of contendency for the MVP. But I think he's just clearly been their best player. Dejounte Murray's been very crucial, but Trae's clearly been the best player in 14 of their 24 wins. For Boston, best team in the league, 43-12, and their best player, Jason Tatum. We've got him at 19 wins. Some discourse around Jason Tatum and his thoughts on the MVP, and that being previously held back or held against him, mainly because of those finals performances. I'm not buying it. I think he had his best individual season last year. It's pretty evident he's just got a better team around him this year. Seen a lot of discourse around super teams around Jason Tatum too. I don't really believe in that stuff, but yeah, he's been their best player in 19 wins. He's been their best player. He's been one of the 10 best players this year. He's going to get another All-NBA nod, and he might finally get the jewel in his crown that he's been chasing for quite a while now as a champion of the NBA come season's end. Brooklyn, 21-33, best players been Mikal Bridges with 8 wins. They certainly have underperformed for me. Brooklyn, they've just sacked another coach, and they're back to the drawing board once again. Plenty of conversation about them needing to build around Mikal Bridges and 1 or 2 superstars. That was pretty evident when they got Mikal Bridges. If they'd have just kept Kevin Durant, I think they look like a completely different team. But they'll be okay. I think once you get a couple of pieces there and you can lure them to Brooklyn, not have the pressure in New York, try and build up against the Knicks, build a bit of rivalry there. Charlotte, 13-41, and their best player this year is a guy that's no longer on the team, and that's Terry Rozier with 4 wins. Charlotte just continue to be a basket case. They are backing in LaMelo really strong, which I like to see, and they've got Miles Bridges still, who, yep, I think everyone knows the Miles Bridges situation, in my opinion on that. But yeah, I think their best player has been Terry Rozier, and they traded him away for a full restock there, and hopefully they're able to try and build on something in the next couple of seasons. Chicago, 26-29, sitting in a similar position to Utah. It somehow feels like they've had a worse year than Utah, which is really weird, but I think because Utah had a really good purple patch there for about 4 weeks, really building themselves up. DeMar DeRozan, their best player, with 8 wins, and yeah, I think someone like Kobe White's certainly going to be taking that mantle very, very soon. The Bulls are going to continue to sit around that top 10 mark in the East and be a real threat towards the play-in tournament. But they'll want to be at 500. I can't see a Bulls team that's not at 500 not making the play-in tournament. Interesting times ahead for Chicago. Cleveland, they've had a really nice run, and they've started to get some pieces back. They're 36-17 in the East. Best player has been Donovan Mitchell with 21 wins, a guy who is genuinely knocking on the door of the top 5 of the MVP race, let alone top 5 of the East. With players getting injured and missing games, he's going to start to become a real contender there. Of course, it's a matter of him staying healthy, staying fit, and it'll be really good to see what the chemistry looks like around mid-March for Cleveland now that they've got Mobley and Garland back. A real sneaky to potentially slide into the conference finals there in the East. Detroit, worst team in the league, 8-46. Their best player has been Jalen Duren with 3 wins all season. Over to Indiana, 31-25. Tyrese Halliburton, their best player, with 16 wins so far. But overall, I think if you were going to go on total wins, another guy who's starting to make a real case for them, Pascal Siakam. I still think Siakam's been one of the 10 best players in the East this season. Traded, so it does remove him out of an MVP candidacy. And it probably affected, well, it certainly affected his All-Star selection. But Halliburton's had a really nice year himself. He's been critical of the 65 games. I get it because he's been injured. At the end of the day, your value does come from being on the court and what you're able to deliver. when Halliburton's been on the court and been delivering, he's been one of the best players in the league. There's been no question about it. He has a genuine All-NBA first-team case, but it's going to be really hard now for him, particularly as the Warriors climb to just above 500 with Shai Gilgeous playing really well and Luka. But Halliburton, a really nice season. Indiana looking to build on something. Whispers that Paul George may return. We'll see how that goes. Miami, 30 and 25. They're part of that cluster there. Bam, their best player this season with 12 wins. Said it before, I've said it again. Continues to show why he was the man in the NBA Finals last year for the Heat. That was the moment he really snatched this team. It's good to have some pinch hitting there from a Jimmy Butler, but it's clear Bam Adebayo, the best player for the Miami Heat this season. They're in that logjam. They're going to really try and get into the 6. And I think between Philadelphia, Miami, Indiana, they're going to be the teams that are going to be really fighting for 5, 6, 7, thereabouts there in the East. For Milwaukee, best player on the season has been Giannis with 24 wins. They're 35 and 21, and there's a lot of questions now being asked, more than answers being provided, particularly after Doc Rivers joined the team as a coach. They're wanting to run a bit more through Giannis, they're wanting to run a bit more through Lillard, try and open things up. They're going to have to start getting wins though, because as they say, the very good to great teams are 50 before 20, and Milwaukee have really slipped down the seedings, dealing with New York, who are right on their tail there, dealing with Cleveland, who are well ahead of them at this point. The last thing that you want to be is Milwaukee playing from behind. Now, you don't want to undersell them, but you certainly can't overrate them at this point. They still have a bit of work to do. Some chemistry to build if they can get it right in the last 6 weeks. If they're the hottest team going into the playoffs, look out. Could be a very sneaky East contender. Over to the Knicks, 33 and 22. Their best player has been Jalen Brunson. He's going to look to shoulder a lot more of that load with the conversation of Julius Randle going for surgery. It's really hard, though, when your best player is only 6'1". That's just a fact of life. Some interesting discourse coming out that he wanted a 4-year extension worth $55 million with Dallas, who rejected him twice. Now, for Dallas, would it have helped? Probably. But at the same time, for Brunson, it's worked out really, really well. The positives that could have been there for Dallas certainly don't outweigh the positives that have been going Brunson's way. The Knicks, they're continuing to fight, continuing to push, and they'll be battling along with the next 2 teams I do mention to really try and keep in that top 6, or certainly be about the top 6. First one there is Orlando, 30 and 25. And I had Paolo Banchero as their best player in 17 wins. He's clearly stepped up, he's clearly stepping out, and for me, he's clearly one of the 10 best players in the NBA this year. He has made another leap in this league. It's not a LeBron James level leap, but when you want to look at LeBron from year 1 to year 2, it's obviously a bit different. LeBron was clearly a top 10 player when he first entered the league, playing on a poor team. I do believe he got MVP votes in his first year too, LeBron. But for Banchero, I'd be shocked if he doesn't get any form of votes in the MVP. If he's not sitting top 10 in the MVP, really disappointed in the league right now. He's been pretty much there or thereabouts all of the year. He's taken that next step. He's really scruffed Orlando as his team. And finally, as other teams that were contending, Philadelphia, 32 and 22, 10 above 500. He's not eligible for the MVP, and there's talk that he won't be back until the end of February, maybe, or certainly the end of March, early April. That's Joel Embiid. I've got him down for 25 wins. Not eligible for the MVP. So it'll be a really interesting look by the time that things roll around at the end of the month, just how the MVP race does sit. But Embiid, a massive year. Not going to be able to enjoy the fruits of his labour from an individual standpoint, but I think if he can be really heavily motivated, if he can rehab well and the injury's not as bad as first thought, Philadelphia get back in contention once again. Embiid trying to answer a lot of those naysayers in the postseason. Finally, Toronto, well, one of the 2 final teams. Toronto, they're 19 and 36. Their best player for me all season has been Pascal Siakam. Now, it's going to shock a lot of people because Scotty Barnes was an all-star. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination Scotty Barnes has had a better year than Pascal Siakam. I think Scotty Barnes has had a breakout year, and it's clear to see why Toronto want to back him in as one of their 2 best players. But he has not been their best player this year. Pascal Siakam, for me, has contributed to the most wins. He has been their best player. Scotty Barnes is going to be able to take a bit more of the burden there for the rest of the year, which I think is really good. It's going to see some development for him, and I think you're going to see a really nice effort there up in Toronto over the next couple of years for Scotty Barnes, but Siakam was their best player. Trade him away for a fresh start. I don't mind it, and for Siakam, he's landed on his feet in a nice situation. Finally, Washington, 9 and 45. Kyle Kuzma, their best player with 5 wins. That's about all you really need to know as far as the Eastern Conference is concerned so far this season. Over in the West, starting with Dallas as always. 32-23, 9 games above 500. Best player Luka in 22 wins, but the real question is, where will they finish in the seeding? It's going to be a really tough battle for them. It could be a very much a point here where Luka's going to average 35, 9 and 10, and they're going to finish in the play-in tournament. So it's one thing for Luka to be able to put up these numbers. It's going to be another thing for the team to be able to get some wins. Trade time, obviously they've been able to secure something there with Gafford, Washington. Hopefully they're able to still continue to get something out of Kyrie and really look to develop something within this team. But right now Dallas looking like a playing team, and from functionality as a team, certainly looking like the best of the worst bunch as far as the playing teams are concerned. Will be very interesting to see exactly how they finish out the rest of this season. Denver 36-19, best player Jokic in 27 wins, and them along with the Clippers, along with Minnesota, and along with OKC are going to battle it out seed-wise 1 through 4. Really simple. It's just going to be a matter of where they all finish, and I think right now, when you're looking at the ability to get it done down the stretch, get it done when it matters, and the fact they're the reigning champions, they may still be the team to beat. Right now, it looks like it's going to be Denver versus Boston in the NBA Finals. A team that's really bounced back right now. They're above 500. They're not quite at the top 8. They're certainly in the play-in tournament. They're above 500. That's the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry, their best player, 20 of their 27 wins to his credit. And it's going to be a matter now of seeing whether Kuminga can keep pushing, whether Kuminga can keep producing alongside of Steph, whether Draymond's going to be able to keep his head screwed on, whether Clay's going to be able to relish the idea that in limited minutes he comes out and really puts on a performance. Hopefully that's motivating for him. Golden State can certainly be a plus 500 team. They can certainly be a playing team. They're not going to be one of the 6 best teams now, and I think it's going to be a matter of them trying to survive that playing team to at least get to the 8th seed heading into the playoffs. Houston 6 games below 500, 24-30 on the season. Şengün, their best player, with 14 wins. And as a Rockets fan, I'll take this as a win. You've sat above 500 for all but pretty much 3 weeks of the season, had a couple of down periods, but you've absolutely unearthed a star in Şengün, who I feel should have been at the All-Star game, but he'll use that as motivation. I think Houston will use it as motivation. They've been able to keep Jalen Green, so it'll be interesting to see whether they keep him around heading towards the back end of the year. As far as will they keep him next year? Dylan Brooks, Fred VanVleet doing their job as well. Houston, as I said, wouldn't have picked them to be above 500 at any point this season. They've been above it all but 3 weeks realistically. So a nice start for Houston, a nice rebuilding year for Houston. Şengün stepping out as always. The Clippers 36-17. Again, one of the 4 teams battling away at the very top of the league, or certainly in the very top of the West. And their best players being Kawhi Leonard. Hasn't really been close for me. James Harden has had some really nice contributions. Again, he's been traded though, so where was his value on the other side of things? On the other side of that, Paul George been playing some really nice basketball. Kawhi's just been on an absolute tear. If Kawhi had been doing this since the very start of the year, and you see him certainly on a team that, for the Clippers, if they were further up the ladder, you're probably seeing more of the conversation around the MVP. I think Kawhi's been one of the 10 best players this season. I think Kawhi is going to be another All-NBA selection. For the Lakers, they're 4 games above 500, and I think their best player this season has been Anthony Davis with 15 wins. And we're talking about the Anthony Davis of New Orleans 2017-18. We're talking about the Anthony Davis of 2019-20 with the Lakers, his 2 best years. Years where he was clearly the standout for me, and made a very good case on both ends of the floor, not only as the Defensive Player of the Year, but certainly as the MVP of the league in both of those seasons. A really, really good case to be made again this year. In the games that he's played, that he has been just as dominant, getting it done on both ends. I think you're going to see him really compete with that Defensive Player of the Year award, but it's going to be a matter of the Lakers being a playoff team, genuine playoff team for that to happen. 30-26, they're sitting okay. Memphis, for me, had some really good hopes there for about 4 weeks until injuries really kicked in. They're 20-36 on the season. I still think Desmond Bane has contributed the most of any player that this year. Been responsible for 9 of the team's 20 wins. He hasn't played for a while there. Ja Morant, from an actual value standpoint, when you look at the games played, games won, and wins contributed to, he probably has a genuine case as an MVP. But he only played like 10 games. So Memphis are going to be a rebuilding year, going to be interesting to see what they do. Of course, traded Steven Adams for Victor Oladipo, essentially a contract swap there. Very interested to see what happens. And yeah, I like the idea that you're going to have Victor Oladipo maybe do a bit of a bounce back there in Memphis. And I certainly like the idea of Steven Adams sitting down there in Houston for my Rockets. Minnesota, 39-16. Best player Anthony Edwards with 20 wins. And this is a team that has the ability on both ends of the floor. The X factor for me is going to be the attitude of Karl Anthony Towns. Can Karl Anthony Towns continue to maintain his status as that second option? Can he continue to see that the best option for the team is with Edwards leading it offensively and Rudy Gobert leading it defensively? If Karl Anthony Towns can pinch hit amongst all of that and play fundamental basketball, you're looking at a far different team and a far better team. Do I think they've probably peaked? No, I still think there's a few more years left in this current makeup of Minnesota. But there's a reason they're one of the 4 best teams in the NBA right now. There's a reason they're one of the 4 best teams in the West. And they're a genuine chance to make a conference final run, potentially an NBA finals run. Minnesota sitting really nicely. A team that's really sat nicely as well. They've sort of flown under the radar, but they're starting to bounce back there. New Orleans with Zion Williamson. He's their best player, but he's only been their best player in 9 wins. They've had a really nice rounded share with Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum this year. Zion has relished his role. He's realised that he needs to work hard. He realised that it's not going to just happen for him. And if a guy with so much talent and potential is going to waste it, going from looking like a prime Charles Barkley to looking like Oliver Miller, there's quite a scope of performance there. So for Zion, he's relishing this role. For New Orleans, they're embracing this role. Brandon Ingram's still able to do his thing. He's had some really good weeks. CJ McCollum, I still don't like the amount of shots he takes, but he's lifting his efficiency. New Orleans, they're a team that could genuinely be one of the 6 highest seeds there in the West. If they get to a play-in tournament, they might be a bit trouble, and I think it becomes on name brand alone. They become a little bit of trouble, but with the way they're going, they're winning key games, could be a top 6 team. A team that could make for an interesting matchup in the first round, particularly with the just the differences that you see with McCollum, with Ingram, with Williamson, and particularly as well when you look at what Jonas Valanciunas brings. A genuinely huge body at centre is still hard to come by and still hard to compete at any level. To OKC, 37-17, and a guy who to me is just blowing away the competition this year as the best player in the league. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, responsible for 34 wins. He's been nothing short of dominant. He's had a really nice core around him that's helped, but nothing short of dominant. He's clearly been their best player. He's had some good help with Williams. He's had some good help with Dort. He's had some good help with Wallace. He's had some good help with Giddey. He's had some good help with Chet. He's now got Gordon Hayward coming into the team. This is an OKC team that's really wanting to capitalise on a window. And I think with health prevailing, they're going to continue to do it. As I said, they've got enough draft stocks where, look, if they choose not to and something goes awry, they can fall back on those draft stocks. They've got plenty of pieces they can build around, plenty to trade to. But right now they're cashing in 20 games above 500 and genuinely threatening to be 50-20 through 70 games. That is a genuine contender, ladies and gentlemen. The one question remains for OKC, do they look to try and pull something in the off-season? There's talk about Paul George back to Indiana. There's also talk about Paul George going back to Oklahoma City. I don't know how that would fit, but playing him next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that is a really big complementary piece. I think you have to probably give up a little bit too much for it, but that's a really good complementary piece for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, particularly when you consider Paul George will be 13, 14 seasons in by then, and injury certainly not in his favour at this joint. Phoenix 33-22. They've had a nice little run here towards the All-Star break. Best player has been Kevin Durant with 17 wins. But right now that Phoenix team, when it is all on the floor, when they are laying it all out, the number one offensive possession team in the league, and it's not hard to see why when you have three different players who can score at all 3 levels. You get the facilitation there of a Jusuf Nurkic. They are just firing. Phoenix, again, another team that's going to be contending 5 through 8 in the conference, along with Sacramento, along with New Orleans. Jeez, it just continues to stack up about all these teams that are really competing out in the West. Another deep competition and a prime example, really, of the parity in the league, where people want parity, and when they get it, they don't really like it because it's not as predictable and it's not as dominant. But I'm really liking the balance that the West has this year. Prime example here, particularly when you look at Phoenix, could be a top 4 team right now. 6, 7, 8. They're really battling to stay top seed over in the play-in tournaments there. Portland 15 and 39. Their best player's been Jeremy Grant, 5 wins this year. And unlucky with the Robert Williams injury. That's hurt their defence a lot. As I've mentioned before, plenty of complementary pieces, championship level complementary pieces. Trying to put them all together to find a star has been difficult, and it'll be a really interesting conversation. I think if you stick with Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, and Scoot Henderson, then all of a sudden you can sort of pick 1 or 2 players from there. But Portland 15 and 39, just one of those years. Sacramento 31 and 23, again another team that's going to be right in that mix, trying to compete for 6, 7 and 8. Particularly when you're going to have the Clippers, you're going to have Denver, you're going to have teams like Dallas, all of that are really trying to vie. It's a really tight competition when you consider everyone in the top 10 of the West is going to be a plus 500 team. Sacramento still competing, and I think Sabonis has been their best player with 16 wins. Another guy really pushing that top 10 in the league conversation. Third best center in the league this year. Going to get an All-NBA nod. Should have probably got an All-Star nod in the West. Certainly should have got an All-Star nod in the West. But it'll be interesting for Sacramento knowing that De'Aaron Fox turned down an extension. He's looking for that max deal. Do you keep him there with Sabonis? Do you just let Sabonis stay where he is? Do you move Sabonis on? I don't know, but I think when you've got Sabonis as your best player and he's doing all 3 levels of that offensively, you need to probably look at getting some shooters. You need to look at getting a bit of defense in there. Same thing we spoke about with Sacramento before the season started. San Antonio, their best player is the best rookie on the planet and one of the best generational prospects we've seen in a while. Victor Wembanyama, 8 of their 11 wins he is responsible for. I'm still adamant you clear most of that roster out. At least they're 4 backup guys with 4 decent veterans. Let them teach the younger guys. This team is 20 wins better. I would have no hesitation to say that through 55 games that you could easily have this team at 27-28 or 28-27. No issues if you just add those veterans in. It's a vastly different looking outfit when you do that. Finally, Utah had a nice real run heading towards the playoffs, sort of heading towards the All-Star break. Just had a bit of a mini slump there. Haven't quite been able to regain that form. They're just a few games below 500, but plenty of opportunities for them at the moment. Wouldn't want them to particularly be right there trying to compete, so to speak. Trying to compete against teams for that 8, 9 and 10, particularly when you look at the quality of some of those teams and the stature of some of those teams. That could prove to be a real issue for them to compete against. But Utah trying to just do their bit, just sitting outside the top 10 in the West. Speaking of top 10s, let's look at the top 10 in the East. Boston at 1, Cleveland at 2, and they are really right behind there in 2 as far as they're about 7 games back. Boston 43 and 12 as I mentioned. Cleveland second. Milwaukee hot on their heels at 3rd. Then you've got New York and Philadelphia and Indiana battling 4, 5 and 6. You then have Miami and Orlando sitting above 500, 7th and 8th, needing to compete with Chicago, 3 back from 500, and Atlanta 7 games back from 500. So that is your top 10 in the East. In the West, Minnesota, they are currently leading it, and it is the barest of margins. They made a little bit of a break, and by a little bit of a break I mean 2 games, but beyond that it's 1.5 games, or half a game if that, between OKC, the Clippers and Denver. You then look at New Orleans at 5, Phoenix at 6, Dallas at 7, Sacramento at 8. I mean, that's the kind of competition you're looking at. The Lakers 4 games, they're below there in at 9th, and Golden State above 500 at 10. So some really competitive teams. I mean, to give you an idea, Atlanta at 24 and 31, Houston at 24 and 30. I'd nearly take Houston's year over Atlanta's, and that's not even speaking from a roster standpoint. That's speaking from where do you sit as a franchise, where do you sit as a team. Of course, with the All-Star break comes the All-Star weekend. Really anticlimactic, so I'm only going to brush over this briefly. You had Mac McClung win his 2nd consecutive dunk contest, and he put on a really nice show. I mean, he's not a really big guy, so he put on a really nice show. It's good to see that he has 2 dunk titles to 4 NBA games. Do not do the math on exactly what that looks like when Mac McClung has played 82 games. He's going to have a longer career in the dunk contest than LeBron as a player. 3-point contest, Damian Lillard defends his title. Again, known 3-point shooter. Purely plays in the wrong era as far as being a big name shooter and clutch player. Steph Curry plays in the same era. Really doesn't help him. Speaking of Steph, he won the Battle of the Sexes at the 3-point line with a lot of overblown commentary on Kenny Smith's call regarding the 3-point line and the ball used, everything of that nature. Anyone with half a clue about basketball understands and gets what Kenny said. If you're offended by that, you just really don't have a clue what's going on. Everyone's sort of looking for something in that realm, but I would challenge anyone who sits behind a computer like me and just sits there and shoots threes. Go and do it with a size 6 from a WNBA line, and then go and pick up a size 7 and go and shoot from the NBA line. And go and tell me after a month of shooting just WNBA line, WNBA ball, that you then go and try and shoot from the NBA line with the NBA ball, and tell me that there's no difference, or even just try and shoot from the NBA line with the NBA ball. A lot of things change. I don't fault Kenny's assessment there. I think people are just trying to be hurt for the sake of being hurt. All-Star Weekend, pretty much a fail, beyond Mac McClung and Steph Curry doing their thing. You had players taking the absolute P155 out of the Skills Challenge. You had no one really caring about any of the team's events. And I just think All-Star Weekend has really lost its luster. All capped off by a 211 to 186 scoreline, with players saying they didn't go out to compete, they were never going to go out and compete, all on the 60th anniversary of the 64 All-Star Game, where players literally fought for their rights to be paid and have their Players Association recognised. That, for me, sums up the All-Star Weekend. And ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for my All-Star break wrap of the 23-24 NBA season. That's been me, guys. I'm out.